Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining the latest PwC Power of People Reimagined LinkedIn Live series program. Today, absolutely delighted. I think we've got over 250 people who are already joined, which is fantastic. We really appreciate that. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by two fabulous colleagues from different sides of the pond. In the US, we have Anthony Abatiello. Anthony is our workforce leader in PwC. He is well known to many of you, I'm sure. He's very well known in the leadership education space as well as other areas as well. So good morning, Anthony from New York. Nice to see you.
Good afternoon. Great to be here.
And closer to me is a colleague called Jo Salter. Jo leads PwC's Centre for Transformative Leadership. Jo, again, is known to many of you. She's an inspirational role model, particularly for women and young girls who are seeking to sort of break through into business careers, not least actually because Jo was Great Britain's first female combat pilot and has been a trailblazer ever since. Good afternoon, Jo. Welcome and good to see you.
Afternoon, Pete.
So look, for people joining today, please do feel free to ask any questions throughout. I'll be monitoring those and try and answer those as we go through. We've already had some really good questions in advance, so thank you for those. But before we get into the meat of the conversation, let me just tee it up a little bit. We've been talking for a long time around the megatrends that we face actually as humanity, irrespective of the organisation we work for. Be that sustainability and climate challenges, be it disruptive technology, demographic challenges that we have, geopolitical instability, and also social instability. All these huge things that organisations and people need to respond to actually for the survival of humanity, irrespective again of where they work. And indeed, I think given those big challenges, there's a requirement for organisations to change, to transform. And that was echoed, I think, in PwC's CEO survey, the 26th CEO survey that we released a couple of months ago, where 40%, 4 in 10 of business leaders said that they need to transform their organisation if they're to remain economically viable in the next 5 to 10 years. That's a pretty significant number. So we've got this environment of organisations, humans, leaders facing these challenges in the long term, but then equally with some short-term challenges thrown in for good measure as well. And yet, if we look at the statistics around the success of transformational programs, depending on which ones you believe, but it's anywhere between 60 and 80% fail to deliver the desired outcomes. So in a world where we need to transform, in a world where the vast majority of programs are failing to deliver, what's going on? Maybe Anthony, let's go to you first.
Well, thanks. And the reality is, everything you say is true, and it has been true for the last 10 years. We were researching and writing about this over a decade ago. And the fact of the matter is the pandemic has only exacerbated that problem, because before we were dealing with leaders who just couldn't drive that digital transformation or drive that growth and have that mindset. Now we've also identified those leaders who can't grow, who can't lead during a time of execution, as we saw during the pandemic. So you have these two forces coming at you, and it's just made the need for leadership capability to be even stronger amongst our client organizations who are really trying to drive accelerated change post-COVID. And the reality for most of the clients that I speak with and that we work with is we still are focusing on the traditional means and methods of developing that skill and capability versus shifting to the context and the true leader capability that is needed to drive change and to be effective in delivering the transformation. And I still get clients who are so wide-eyed when I say, almost 90% of large-scale transformation fail because of leadership. Not because technology didn't work, not because of a data conversion, not because of cyber. It is really ineffective leadership to help us fail fast, fail often and learn faster, for us to even look at some of the ways in which we can prototype and experiment before actually everything being buttoned up and perfect. And that's something that is a mindset shift, that the way we think changes the way we act, and ultimately who we are as a leader.
And just adding to what Anthony said there, Pete, the reason that he's given, one of them already, about leaders not knowing how to lead and how the skills are. And what, we're in a really privileged position to be able to speak to thousands of people in multiple organizations who often send people on traditional leadership or brackets management training, and then they have these massive transformations. But what they say is they don't marry the two. They don't enable their leaders to understand how to execute and lead and take people with them on those transformations. Interestingly, the second point of why transformations fail is because people don't understand why they have to go through that transformation. And therefore, because they don't understand, they have the barriers to change that we all, natural resistance, which of course, again, impacts that success.
So it's interesting, actually, of all the places you could have gone to, right? You've gone straight to leadership. You've gone, I think, interpreting what you just said there, Joe, to kind of what I interpret as kind of communications and clarity around outcomes you're trying to achieve, right? But let me just, you're both leadership experts, right? Last time I looked, in the US alone last year, conservatively about $125 billion was spent on leadership education. Worldwide, just shy under $200 billion, right? So there's a lot of investment going into leadership. So how come we're at this kind of state then? All that investment, are people wasting their money?
I mean, short answer for me is yes. I've said this for years. It's the reason why it's the most written about book. It's the reason why it is. Everybody has a model, a method, and so I think it's unfortunate because I think organizations, especially FTSE 200, Fortune 500, they spend a tremendous amount of resource at what Joe was talking about. Like, we take the fish out of the proverbial pond, we try to clean them over here, and then we throw them back into the dirty pond. And the dirty pond is actually where we all live and work as leaders. And so this idea of leadership for everyone, that everyone in the organization is a leader and that everybody should have it, forces us into this place of not prioritizing the needs of actual leaders who actually make change happen. So the investment, the resource, the dollars really need to go into saying, all right, where are the leaders that are impacting our business, that are really driving our culture? Those are the leaders where we want to invest the most in building that muscle, and then helping them build that muscle in the context of where they work every day. We all love, I'm sure we would all love to go for 2 weeks to some, fancy resort and have, wonderful opportunities to converse. But when I get back home, when the fire drill happens, when, issues arise, when decisions need to be made, that's where leadership is needed. And that's where leadership development needs to occur.
And what's so interesting about that is, with some of what you were talking about, Pete, the consequences of the megatrends, the amount of change and transformation that needs to happen, not only within every organization, but within governments, within countries, and the impact that's going to have, it does mean that we need to be able to work collaboratively. So not only do we need to understand our own fish pond, we need to understand the fish pond next to us that sits in the ocean and the impact that all of that is having. And again, to be able to, with the multiple crises that we've seen and we continue to see, we'll also need to be able to build that transformative leader. And that transformative leader is somebody who is so very different from the archetypal way we have described leadership before. And I think that that's a really critical element.
Okay, so just exploring that again a little bit further, if I may, around. Have we lost you, Anthony?
I think we've lost Anthony. So he's
Anthony's
coming back.
We had a power outage in my office. The New York power grid. There we are. We're back.
Okay, we're back. Well, welcome back. So listen, this point around the leader, you talk about the requirement for a different form of leader in the context and the world in which we live. And Anthony, I love the way you talk there around, you can go away somewhere, but actually the context of the real life where you work often gets in the way. Let's go to one that we often hear, right? You get what you measure. So are there appropriate frameworks in place, incentives that actually are inspiring those right behaviors? Or is that an area that you're seeing organizations trying to grapple with?
Was it, I think since the dawn of time, the panacea has been, how do we measure the ROI on leadership development? And what I say is success, right? It is the ROI is successful change. We've driven a successful change. We've grown the business. We've achieved the results. That's the ROI, and that's the reason to develop and invest in executives. And I think that the best measure is really looking at, or the best approach is looking at the context of your business, your sector, right, the organization, and say, what's happening around that executive? What's happening in our business? What's happening in our industry? Every day I walk out of my home, what's happening in my community, right? That is the context of leadership. And really defining what are the right behaviors, what are the right mindset shifts that we have to change and impact in order to get leaders to think differently. Because in the end, it really isn't about giving you a litany of skills. It's really changing the way leaders think and approach the situations that they are in the context which they're in every day. So if you can focus on, all right, I know what good leadership is, right? Leaders have to set strategy, they have to get results, they have to lead people, right? They have to build relationships, influence stakeholders, right? We know that that's a given. Those are table stakes today. But to really drive digital transformation or business model transformation or leading a cost optimization effort, that takes different muscle in addition to those things that make you a good leader. And so the way you think and how willing are you to take risk, or how willing are you to challenge the status quo, or do you have the ability to take somebody who is very much against this change and influence them to be a follower, or at least neutralize to not be negative. That is where I think the measures are important, and that's the areas to focus on the most to get to that outcome the fastest.
And I think Anthony has really started to identify some of the elements that we have. We spent some time in the Centre for Transformative Leadership saying, what are the differentiators between that leader that Anthony is really describing? And that first one is really having that deep understanding and curiosity of the world. And it's not only just, as we just said, within the organization, but more broadly, what's coming? How do you have that? And that paradoxical nature of seeing what's coming whilst also being able to respond in the here and now and addressing that short and long term at the same time. Again, people really struggled during the crisis to be able to do that. And I think then being ambitious, that was that radical ambition that somebody wants to really focus on where we can make a difference that is going to be sustainable for the long term, is going to respond to these large trends that we're seeing with generative AI, with climate change and such like. And then really making sure that the outcomes that are being delivered are real and are going to really focus on those critical things that are going to make a difference. And again, Anthony really described well that acting as a catalyst. Who is that person who is a magnet of purpose, who can take people not only on the journey, but nurture and evolve them to be able to deliver their own transformation where required? And then the final one is really having that energy and resilience to fuel your own engines, to have the growth mindset, and to really keep healthy whilst doing this, because it can, of course, as we all know who have led transformations, be really exhausting.
Mm-hmm. I saw that there was a comment from Emma in here. I want to be provocative. Like, I do think leaders need to be prepared before the transformation begins. However, you have to get them in the context of their problem. Like one of my former colleagues, Noah Rabinowitz, and I used to call this the bring your own problem. Like, you need your problems that you're facing in the transformation to help you develop as a leader. So you want to give them, there's the good skills and knowledge we can give them as the transformation starts, but helping and coaching and developing them while the transformation is going has even more lasting results, because the neuroplasticity, right, what we can remember, all of that changes during that process when I'm faced with the challenges of making decisions and driving change.
And I like to respond to that as, sorry, Pete, I will let you get in. I like to respond to that as the half-life, because of course, once the point that you do some training, there's only a half-life to it, that information goes, and how you have to respond in the here and now can be so very different. Sorry, Pete, go on.
No. It's fascinating to listen to you both, because you both went there kind of a little bit around skills, right? Again, it's something from our CEO survey around when asked, what are your concerns in terms of the boardroom? So one, unsurprisingly at the moment, I think we are in the midst of a worldwide skills shortage, right? So getting the right skills, the in-demand skills is something front and center. But also, when you drill down to the skills that are most in demand, they're often the hardest. It's kind of those skills are the softer skills, right? Around dealing with ambiguity, around networking, around problem solving, around teaming, right? With the organisations you're working with, and for both of you, right, because you both do a lot of stuff with the Centre for Transformative Leadership, how are you addressing that? What are you hearing from organisations? And I know it's cross-sector and cross-geography.
So one of the ones that I've really heard is about empowerment from multitude of organisations, where there is this, our leaders are empowered to make decisions, but yet then they fail to make the decisions, because the truth of the culture is that there is fear and anxiety that's built in, that what will happen as the consequence of making that decision if it's wrong. And so there's a big piece of work that can be done about really supporting decision making, so that if the wrong decision is made, it doesn't become a blame culture. So that's one area. Anthony.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And I think it actually it ties very well with what you're saying, Joe. Is for me, the simplicity of self-awareness is so important, and it's oftentimes missed. Like, we so focus. I work with some very heavy engineering organizations, or analytic financial services organizations, and we focus so much on the hard skill, and the real soft skill is the X factor, and understanding who I am as a leader and how I impact others is so critically important. And it's so simple. Sometimes it's not always simple for the leader, but it's simple in terms of identifying that self-awareness. But once I understand that, I have the ability to influence and execute results better than others. Because if I know how my leadership is received, not just perceived, how it's received, I know that I'm going to have a better and more effective way at helping others achieve their results through my leadership. I'm going to be able to help influence others and trust me, and get in the boat and float with me through this change, and really have that level of integrity through my own vulnerability and self-awareness. So I think one begets the others.
I love that, Anthony, because I think you referred to earlier on around you can Google leadership and a gazillion returns come out very quickly. You get a very different response if you put in followership. But I think where you're going, I think where you're going there is, I think great leaders create that environment of followership. People want to work with them. They want to follow them, not just out of curiosity, but because they're being focused. They know why they're doing something, what the outcome is they're trying to achieve. Now, I'm conscious of time, and at the moment, I'm not going to not mention generative AI actually in ChatGPT, right? Because I think it is so front and center for so many people, organisations at the moment. How do you see generative AI helping, assisting in the context of delivering successful transformation programs?
I mean, generative AI is going to completely transform the way we work, and the ability to take some of those lower scale roles and the more mundane pieces of work that we need to do in an office environment. And that means that it enables us to spend more time in the iterative nature of work, of the responding and leading, and being focused on that self-awareness that we're talking about. And one thing I just wanted to add was the importance of feedback, because there is something about being able to give feedback in the moment rather than at the end of some performance year, of actually being able to really focus on building high-performing teams as leaders. And I think that shift that we will see with generative AI is just so exciting, but will require whole systemic change within organizations.
Yeah, and I think if you go back to the RPA, when RPA was first introduced, and we were talking about how do I, as a leader, how am I going to be leading in a world with humans and robots, right? We're adapting to that, and it changes. And I think with generative AI, we're getting to that point where that is going to continue to change and provide new ways of working, as Joe said, which will require new ways of thinking as a leader, and how I'm managing teams, or how I'm leading teams with new information. So you'll have AI, you'll have robots and robotics, and you'll have humans, and all of them will interact in a very different way a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. The good news is that none of there are very good examples of how we adapted to all of this as leaders, and we learn from it, right? Go back to the days of email, right? We thought email was going to change when email was created, right? More paper, was used than it was before email, but email created a very different interaction, right? And how we communicated with people, how we expressed ourselves, right? We always talk about the muscles behind the keyboard, right? That generative AI is giving us that same feeling where we have a new sense of information and a new way of working that's going to create new patterns and new capabilities for leaders as they think about how they're going to do all the things they have to do in their job to help enable get those results and to drive a strategy and to influence others.
And any leader today, Pete, should be absolutely adamant about curiosity about what generative AI is and learning about it, because we need to understand what's coming to be able to respond in the moment.
Although a top tip for me on that subject is do not introduce generative AI to a 14-year-old son who maybe doesn't want to focus on homework, because it gives them a very quick opt-out. Hey, listen, I've got one more. I must get you just for people joining from different organisations, right? So we are in a time of economic stress and pressures. We know again from the CEO survey that many organisations are focused around cost containment, but protecting talent, right? We know that. But I think we've all, I think, been around long enough that we know in that kind of environment, understandably, scrutiny is applied to cost and investments. Often, an area that is cut fairly quickly is investment in education, in leadership, right? So what's your advice to people who are maybe having that discussion in the organizations in which they work?
Yeah, I think development the same way. I know there was a comment earlier about cyber threat and risk. The organizations continue to put hundreds of millions of dollars into something that you're only as good as your last threat, right? And the leaders are the ones driving the bottom line of the organization and driving the results. And so if you take your foot off the gas and go into neutral around your leaders and giving them opportunities to continue to develop their muscle, we're only putting ourselves at greater risk and threat, whether it's for viability, as our CEO survey says, or it's for risk of meeting our objectives as an organization. So I think there are ways in which to optimize cost in the balance sheet and look at other ways of free cash flow to say, how do we continue to invest in the areas that have a direct correlation to our bottom line? And leadership continues to be there. And if there are any CFOs that are out there listening, this is the time to really take a hard look at how do you enable that and provide that to see where the right result will be for the bottom line.
And I think understanding that every organization needs to transform, and the premise that we've already discussed, that transformations tend to fail because of a lack of leadership. So you have to transform, you need good leaders, then it's a no-brainer, because otherwise you are going to fail the transformation and you don't have an organization that's sustainable in 10 years' time. It's critical.
Great. Well, listen, I'm just conscious of time. So rather than asking you both for 3 top tips, reflections, I'm going to ask you each for one. And what do you want people to take away from a brilliant conversation? And I'm so grateful to you both for joining, but so much to cover, we could go on forever. So Anthony, maybe go to you first. What's your one reflection that you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I would go back to organizations that are thinking about developing leaders in the context of transformation is doing such, like looking at what the leadership capabilities are going to be required to drive that transformational change, and then developing those leaders in the context of that change and helping them get the tools and the knowledge and the skill, and then help it be an iterative process for them to continue to develop, and coaching them through that process while they're in the context of that change.
And I will take it to an individual level, because you need to challenge assumptions. The world is different. What is happening with generative AI, the climate change, means that you need to stop and think and say, is that true today? Because that's how we've always done things in the past. And be brave and be bold and just step out and take action.
Brilliant. Hey, thank you both. Right, and for people joining, I know Joe and Anthony, if you want to continue the discussion, you want to connect with them, please do hook up with them on LinkedIn, and I know they would be delighted to do so. Thank you all for joining. Really appreciate your time and some brilliant comments that have come through. We've tried to answer many of them. Those that haven't, we'll get to you separately to make sure we do address those. We will have another LinkedIn Live in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're just trying to finalise the date, where I'll be joined by our workforce and sustainability leader, Peril Munchie, who's a fabulous colleague over in Singapore, and Barry Murphy, who's an equally fabulous colleague who's based in the UK, who leads PwC's European ESG practice. So thanks ever so much indeed for your time and participation, and I wish you all a very happy rest of your day.
Thanks, Pete.